For anybody who's new to the call, I see a bunch of new names. Confidentiality is very important. We like everybody's openness, but if there's anything that you want to talk about specifically or any particular deals, just be generic when you describe the business as far as, don't say an HVAC company in, a suburb of Tampa, Florida versus just saying home services on the west coast of Florida or something along or in the southeast, just because you've more than likely entered a non-disclosure, and so you want to keep that generic in nature, and that'll give us adequate information to cover the subject, even though sometimes it's sector specific. The next thing is for any questions, completely open. So whatever questions you want to raise, just hit the raise hand button or icon at the bottom, and we'll go in order. I have, over the course of the last couple of weeks, have taken a bunch of. I get these alerts from some of these buyer forums, and so I take some notes of what questions are being asked. I get too aggravated about the answers that are being provided, so I don't pay as much attention to those. Usually, they're not very valuable, but I have a bunch of them in case we get stymied or have some extra time. We'll cover some of those as well. And again, feel free to jump in, give us an update, let us know what you're doing, any deals you're working on, and questions, anything and everything you want to cover. So it's whoever wants to jump in first. I see Ed's got his hand up and he's driving, and from my camera, it looks like he's in the UK because it shows him on the opposite side of the car. I know, but good. Jump right in, Ed. Go ahead.
Australia, Richard, Australia.
Oh, even better. I drove in the CBD in Sydney. I drove my father's car and I went to park it, and everybody is waving to me on the street. And I was thinking to myself, everybody's so friendly here. It's so nice. And then I realized I was driving down the wrong side of the road. Everybody was trying to stop me. So that's my driving story in Sydney.
Yeah. No, easy to do. Done it in your country too.
Yes.
My question relates to a situation I'm in currently with a vendor. We're negotiating on the share purchase agreement, on the net debt and the working capital. And in the time that we've been since we signed the term sheet, the business has materially uplifted in revenue and profit. And I'm just wanting to seek your counsel on how hard I push for net debt and working cap when the reality is I'm buying a business and they haven't negotiated or asked for a change in price. So I'm getting it cheaper effectively, and I think it's sustainable. So I think it's a legitimate, if I was in their shoes, given the time elapsed, I'd probably ask for an increase. I'm just asking for, how would you tread in this upcoming negotiation, and pressing for, how would you handle it?
It's a great question and a great
triggering
problem. It's not really a problem. It's a great question and a great situation. So they're really tied together, as you've pointed out. If you push too hard related to leaving in additional net working capital, they're going to say, well, that's fine, but you got to pay us a higher price because you're basing that based on increased volume. What I like to do in this situation is really determine what's most important to me. And in this situation, what would be most important is that the business is tracking in the right direction, in a good direction. And if all things remain the same, that I'm going to get the business potentially not necessarily below market, but below what it may be valued at the day of closing versus the day of the LOI. And so these situations are always a bit of a give and take. Depends how far you are along in the LOI, I would cast that aside for a moment, put more priority on the fact that the business is doing well. And as you dig into looking at the financials, if it becomes materially difficult related to you taking over the business and having a significant shortfall in net working capital, it's something that you could bring up and potentially should bring up, but understand there's a flip side to it. So you really want to weigh what the potential downside is for you. If you win one point, you could lose big on another. The other thing,
sorry.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, it's a two-edged sword in that the business has done well, but its working capital has gone up,
Yes.
and I know that the vendor solicitor and the accountant that's attached with him is trying to work out what it is in relation to what my financial due diligence team have worked out. So I've always negotiated. I said, look, you need to leave. Well, I'd like you to leave as much, well, enough cash because it's cash free, debt free. But we've talked about leaving enough cash in the business
Okay.
so that we don't have to tip in more working capital. And now we're in this situation, so it's a really fun conversation to try and have.
Yeah, no, and it's a good issue, right? I mean, oftentimes it goes the other way where the business is declining. So it's certainly positive that the business is heading in the right direction. Net working capital, by the way, is typically someone's got some background noise, just to let you know. Um, Net working capital typically is going to be based on a period that they're going to examine. So your accountant is going to examine the requirements of the business over a certain period of time. Sometimes it's 3, 6, 12 months. Sometimes it could be longer. So in this case, what I would advise you to do in the LOI, if it's I don't know if you've already articulated it, but you'll want to have the way to get around this is have the net working capital based on a factor of the most recent period. So in other words, the longer period you have the net working capital evaluated for going back, the more you're going to get penalized. So if you do a net working capital formula based on the last 12 months, that's going to paint a different picture than if you do it based on the last three, because the last three is more commensurate with the current volume.
Yeah,
So I would shorten that
yeah.
period if you can.
So, okay, I get that. What do you suggest I do with the calculation relating to the uplift in valuation, even at the multiple that I was buying it on based on the EBITDA that we calculated the multiple on? If I annualize the growth rate that it's at over the next, you know, 6 months, it's traded 6 months in our financial year, and I annualize that, do I just take the delta between what it was and what it will be, and that's my ground to play with in terms of working cap and push, how much I push
Potentially.
and pull?
Potentially.
Yeah.
Working capital is going to, they may factor in, working capital can't necessarily predict the future. It becomes much more of a difficult argument. And so it's typically based on the on the past, based on you determine, is it, again, 3, 6, or 12 months. Sometimes it's longer. You can forecast, this is internally, it's not something that I would be sharing with the seller because
Yeah.
it'll immediately elevate this question of raising the purchase price. The other thing that I will
Yeah.
tell you, and I've seen this repeatedly, Ed, is when a business is growing, and if you don't get that under locked up relatively quick, sellers back out.
Mm.
It's funny, they don't want to
Yeah.
back out when it's declining, but when it's
Mm.
increasing, so the other thing that you may want to consider, by the way, is you can have a two-tiered net working capital clause, meaning you set a you set an amount or a formula for the net working capital, i.e. last 6 months. I'm just giving you an example, by the time of closing, and then money could sit in escrow by the seller, and you have a reevaluation after another 3 or 6 months.
That's a good idea. Mm. Okay.
The flip side again is the more you talk about needing more working capital, the easier it is for them to come to the point of saying, well, I can't keep making these accommodations for you if you're not going to accommodate paying a higher price. And so if that surfaces, you could build in a potential of an earnout.
No,
Because,
there's already an earn out in. There's
okay,
already an earn out
okay.
mechanism in place. Well, long service leave in our country is greater than 5 years, less than 10. Um, when the sellers have a large portion of that long service leave, which is going to be negotiated, again, same situation. Like the seller's not likely to take, who takes long service leave? Well, in a small business, they could argue that, hey, we don't take long service leave, and we never have any sick leave. So the annual leave and the long service leave provisions are quite, they're in the hundreds of thousands for the husband and wife. The wife's not even in the business anymore. But same situation, when we push to remove that, or they push to remove it out of the net debt reductions. Same situation, or how would you handle that?
Yeah, similarly, maybe for sake of everybody in the call, expand upon that a little bit, how that's viewed in
So
Australia.
yeah, long service leave, you get I guess like a once you hit 10 years, you get 3 months paid leave. Every employer is obligated on a federal policy, federal employment law that you're entitled to 3 months annual leave once you go over 10 years service with a company. And that's triggered from 5 years. So you start accruing it, as in it becomes a paid entitlement, sits on the balance sheet, as does long service leave. Once you go over 5 years. So between 5 and 10 years, there's a balance sheet provision for long service leave for employees. The challenge is when it's the owner of the business, and they're saying, "Well, look, I've never taken long service leave. I've been here 20 years, so I think that figure should be removed from the net debt provisions because it's going to come off their purchase price." Um,
So I'll tell
so
you,
it's a tricky one when it's an owner. That's all.
okay, I'll tell you my perspective. It can be
Yeah.
perceived as a tricky one as an owner, but the way I look at it and say, I'm giving you a lifetime service leave with the amount of money that I'm paying you. And so if you want the service leave and that to be favorable for you, you should be an employee. To me, there's no benefit. They're getting X amount as a multiple for that business and all of the benefits that it delivers. And so to me, it's not something that should come out of pocket, whether physically comes out of the pocket or adjusted related to the buyer. With that said, very often it becomes a negotiation.
Yeah. Okay.
It's philosophical as much as it is formulaic because you have
Yeah.
these
So you're
obligations.
saying, look, you're getting paid for the business. There's a 4 year earnout in this business, so he will become an employee of the business. So technically, he'll be entitled to leave, not leave when he wants, but leave when the business he's entitled to, sort
As an
of.
employee,
I mean, give
correct.
or
And
take.
you're getting a
Yeah.
multiple for selling, and this is the life of business ownership. You know, you put in more time than the employees. That's just the life of the owner in most cases.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you. I've taken up enough time. I'll give
No,
some other
no
people some
problem.
questions.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah.
And nice to see you.
Thank you for that.
Of course.
Yeah. Likewise.
Okay, Alexander, I think you're up next.
Amazing. I have two questions. I'm going to start with the first one, and then we'll see how long it takes. Because
Take
I
as
know
much time as you need.
amazing. So, I'm looking at more along the lines of, companies in the trade space, in and around Canada. And I've hit a point with I'm early stages with a few, or was last year, but um, our construction industry kind of took a tumble last year.
Yes.
And so I found that going into the new year, as a lot of these companies were hitting their year end, it didn't seem like they were doing as well as the year prior. And now it seems like there's a lot of stalling happening.
Yes.
And so I'm running into the point where there's not a lot of activity in the market. And the companies that I was initially chatting with, there's a lot of delays and a lot of radio silence. I'm wondering what the best way to deal with that is. I'm obviously there's the talk about, if the valuation of the company has gone down significantly, obviously that's not something that's beneficial to the owner that's selling. Um, I'm always open to, for me, in my standpoint, I used to be a business owner anyway, so I'm always empathetic to that, part of like, you're selling a small business. Um, you're not making exorbitant amounts of money on the sale, and so you probably want to sell for a lot more. How would you go about that, in terms of re-engaging those conversations, in an engaging way with those owners? Because again, it's been pretty like radio silent across all of them.
This is common. You see this in a couple of different ways. When you're in, just as a sidebar for everybody, when you're in negotiations with anybody, and you're quite a ways down the road, maybe past an LOI in due diligence, whatever. One of the telltale signs that a seller is having second thoughts is they start to slow down the speed at which they provide you with answers or information or responses. That's business buying 101. That's the nothing is closer than that. Sometimes as they seem to be more irritated, but it's typically the 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 timeline that they've set as a general guideline for everything leading up to that point. How they get you information. If they used to turn around 24 hours, now it's taking them 3 days. Those are telltale signs. So it's something you've got to dig into. We talk about it in the course that you got to deal with that head on and see if there's any issues. What I would suggest, Alexander, if you've seen this as being somewhat pervasive, meaning it's happening in more than one instance, and the issue may be related to something symptomatic across the country or what have you, the key is to stay engaged. You can't force someone to ever sell a business, and you can't force them to come to the table, and you can't force them to make a decision. Similarly, you can't force a seller can't force a buyer to complete a transaction. The parties have to get there together. And so when you see this, if this is a sign, not necessarily that they're having second thoughts, but just, there's a lot of uncertainty. You have in Canada, you have the government uncertainty. You had your prime minister resigning. We're talking in the U.S. of making you our 51st state. All these wonderful things that are going on, and so there's some uncertainty, and the tariffs have caused a lot of uncertainty with a lot of Canadian businesses that import product as to how that will impact it. So there just could be a factor of what's happening, politically across the country. And so I would say don't take your foot off the gas, but understand that the conversations may not be as deep. Just stay in touch, make them more conversational. Anything, Mr. Mrs. Seller, anything, that I could do to get back into it if you want to take a break, or I'd like to want to make sure we stay in touch. Any information, just generally more conversational in nature as opposed to potentially requesting information. Keep the deals alive.
Okay.
At the same time, if you go down the road with someone in a couple of months, there's no real movement. There's nothing wrong with saying, like, are you still interested in selling, and what is your timeline? Because we could revisit this in 6 months or what have you. So my approach would be gentle, and conversational, and monitors, each one on their own. But it's not, I don't like to say it's not uncommon. It is common. And I could see it typically happening right now in Canada because there's a lot of uncertainty. I mean, there really is. And in your particular case of home services, tariffs, for example, won't impact anything. But there's a lot of political uncertainty, and maybe that's causing the problem. The one advantage you have in Canada, unlike the U.S., is you have staggered year ends. Like in year end, everything comes to a grinding halt, and then the sellers wait till the new numbers are ready. In Canada, unless it's changed in the since I've been there or lived there 3 decades ago, there's a lot of staggered fiscal year ends, right? Every business you meet has a different year end.
Yep, 100%.
Yeah.
And I guess my follow-up question to that kind of leans into this. Um, in this case, what if it's the broker that seems to be stalling? So I have one particular deal that seemed to be great. I only chatted with the owner once, and we actually hit it off really well on the phone call. Um, but the broker keeps coming back to me saying, I've been trying to get in touch with him and nail him down for this. He's just been he's really busy. I've been trying to get a hold of him and this, that, whatever. Like, he's starting to throw out excuses where I'm like, okay, the first couple times it's fine. And I get that the owner likes to work in the business and he wants to stay on with the business. That's a whole different conversation. He doesn't want to retire. But at what point do I have a particular conversation with the broker, or do I just keep the same strategy? Just keep it friendly, keep it whatever, and not push him along.
No, in this case that you've had engagement with the seller, you want to push them along. It is entirely possible that the seller has been difficult with providing information to the broker or answers, but the reality, the broker wants to sell the business.
Yeah.
And but we don't know whether or not the seller wants to sell. And so what I would suggest to the broker, say, look, I understand your situation. You can't answer questions that you're not getting answered, but I'm either going to move forward relatively quick with an offer, or I'm moving on from this deal.
Yeah.
When a broker hears the word offer, like cha-ching, it starts to go off in their mind. So I would put that out there and say, I don't want to keep spending time. It sounds interesting. I'm totally engaged. I'm very interested. But, if I'm going to move forward with an offer, in any short period of time, we need to have another meeting. So just, run that by the seller.
Yeah.
Similarly, you could say to the broker, was the broker, when you had the meet, when you spoke with the seller, was the broker, was that in person or on the phone?
It was a Zoom call.
And the broker was on the call?
Yeah.
And so far, there's nothing that you would that leads you to believe that the broker is just pulling your leg. I mean, it would be odd because they want to sell a business. So it's not,
Yeah.
you
It
haven't
seemed,
gotten the
yeah,
sense that they're negotiating with someone else and just trying to keep you at bay or.
it didn't seem like that. I mean, we had a few phone conversations since then, and one of them was really brief, but the other one we had a mutual friend in common that he sold a business to, so we had a conversation about that, and he was like, "Yeah, no, it's coming to the year end. The seller is very he's just scrambling to get stuff together. So, but it's been on my list to get a meeting set up with you guys." And then I followed up again like a month later and still nothing. And he
Oh, a
was just
month.
like,
That was my next question. How long? So, yeah, I mean,
so
if it's a month, and we do give them some the benefit of doubt that sometimes it takes in time to get the information, or they don't have it, they haven't told their staff, so there's, it's not like they have a team of people at their disposal to get the information. But once if you go past a month or so with them, it's time to bring it to a head. I mean, even though the
yeah,
prior comment was related to keep it casual, whatever, in this particular instance, you've spoken to the seller, you've spoken to the broker, they may have changed their mind, say, hey, look, Mr. Broker, you could tell so far I'm going to buy a business. So it's going to be this business. It's going to be another one. If it's not this one, we'll work on another one together for all of our peace of mind, sanity, and for not wasting time. Let's just pin this guy down. Let's set up an appointment and have a conversation, get some timelines. And if they can have that, just I would be of the ilk of saying, hey, whenever they're ready, call me. If I'm still available, we'll engage the conversation. But since you've already spoken with them and it's a month past or whatever, you're really, it's beyond the time of reasonable.
okay, great. Thanks, Richard.
Of course. Okay, Andres or Andres, right?
Yeah, it's right. It's correct, the pronunciation actually. That's totally fine. Well, I have actually a couple questions. But before that, I just want to comment about the process that I've been through this past month. I already had a conversation with a seller through a broker, and I sent you an email. You already replied me about it. I already played with the numbers and trying to forecast how it will be if I hire somebody at the regular rate in the market. And actually, I have to double the sales to
I
keep it
remember
going with
that.
the business, and then making sure that the payroll is correct and everything, so on. So, yeah, I decided just to turn off that deal, step aside on that. And I just yesterday I signed another NDA from another broker, and the NDA it seems not be that rigid as the one I signed it before, so which is great. Uh, I'm still being super general about it, as you recommended. That's super super important about this. But other than that, um, one of the questions actually you already answered. It was from Alexander, that you had to be very friendly. Actually, how you following up with the sellers that you're trying to contact with. It's something that I will do after this call. But I just want to be prepared. Actually, at the moment when I buy a business, and I don't want to get ambushed. Actually, and my question will be, what was actually, or what is the analytic process when you bought your business and then you decide to make a decision. For example, let's say that you decide to make a change on the sales process and send a text message to every closed deal just to get a feedback of that, or how long it took you, or what were the questions that you normally have through your mind. I know that you're very tactical reading your book. You have a lot of tactics that were very useful, actually. Thank you for that. And I'm just curious about that because I don't want to get ambushed on my first day acquiring the business. But that's
So
actually the question.
So I have a question for you.
Yeah.
First of all, remember the situation. I want to come back after to what you talked about first, the email exchange that we had, because so remind me after this question, because I think there's a good learning for everybody related to the assessment of what you determine what has to be done when you take over the business. Just to clarify your question, you're asking more related to strategically what is done after the acquisition and how you analyze certain initiatives that you may put into place related to the business?
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right. After the closing, you shake hands with the owner. You probably have him 1 week or 2 weeks with him, just for training purposes. If he's willing to stay around longer, that'll be perfect for culture wise. But let's say they had to make some changes. I know that even the minimal changes, it will be a huge difference in the
Yes.
statements,
Yes.
especially on sales. Um,
Yes.
I
So
don't want to
here's
get
my
ambushed. I don't want to get,
no, you got to
yeah,
be, and here's the way I look at it because it's a great question.
yeah,
The first thing is, unless something catastrophic surfaces
yeah,
after a transaction, because if it surfaces before, you may not close the transaction, but something crazy happens right after closing, and who knows, you can't predict anything. The goal is you get in and spend 2, 3, 6 months, whatever it is, learning the business status quo. The most important thing well, not most important, but certainly one of the most important things when you buy a business, you want to ensure its sustainability, meaning
okay,
that the day you get the keys, you want to make sure that going forward for at least immediate future, things represent what happened in the immediate past. So unless it's a business, for example, that you're very familiar with and an industry you're very familiar with, which is not common. Most people, the vast majority of people buy a business completely outside of their level of experience, completely outside. So there's a learning process. You first have to absorb and learn the business, get the guts. I'd say get the guts of the business into your belly, right? So you're able to make good decisions. Besides, even if you feel that there is something that needs to be done, unless it's critical to the business, if there's any employees, they're going to go into panic mode, even if you're right. And so you want to learn the business first before doing anything fundamental, however long that takes. Now, you don't want to over-index this and take, 6 months when you could do it in 2, or take 12 months when you could do it in 6, but you got to feel comfortable with the business. And the barometer that I like to use is to look at all these things that make, are certain components of the business and understand why they're being done a certain way. Because
okay,
sometimes in some business, they just do things one way because they've just been doing it
right,
that way, not
yeah,
because there's any rationale. It's like, we've been doing this since 1976. Well, it doesn't mean it's right, right? You
yeah,
may
that's
have it
right.
wrong all these years. So you want to understand why it's being done, and then you can make some better decisions. So I would not be in a hurry to make any changes. First, learn the business. That's the first part. The
Yeah,
second,
yeah,
go
sure.
ahead. Go ahead.
No, no, I was used to say that. Yeah, that was the answer that I had on my head. As at the moment that I buy the business, I shouldn't do any
Correct.
critical change. I just take my time to know everybody. There's any staff member, more than two people, know everybody. Especially know the clients, because I'm in the industry where customer centricity is the king to keep their clients with the business. Knowing each client personality and how they like to handle the business, that will be very crucial, actually. And
Yeah,
I was thinking
correct.
more about that than just taking a decision, but it's good to know, actually. That was one of the questions that I had. I just want to be prepared for that day. I don't want to get ambushed. I don't want to be part of the 80% that fail. No, I'm just
90.
kidding.
You
Yeah,
won't be. You won't be because you're in the
I just
hunt.
wanna.
So you won't be. I have
Yeah,
faith. And I'm not blowing smoke up anybody's rear end being on this call. I mean, the fact that you take some of these steps, everybody, join these calls, send in good questions, you're on top of it. I mean, sometimes it takes longer, but you're in the hunt. I mean, so that's the key thing. It's you're not sitting on the sidelines, you're in the hunt, and that's really important. One of the things that I mentioned briefly that Andres brought up in a question was there was a business that he was looking at, and he identified pretty quickly that in order to make the debt service work, he would actually have to double the conversion rate, as I believe what was the number of. And so when you look at something like that, the idea here is don't force a deal to work. And it's in very much in keeping what his second part of the question was, like, what do you do when you take over? If you have to do too much to get that business resurrected or to satisfy debt, there's no guarantee that's going to happen. Again, you're buying something that you want to make sure you do the investigation to make sure it remains status quo. Stability, growth is sexy, but stability is valuable. And so if you're faced with something where you have to potentially, bring in a new operator or replace a key personnel, or say we got to take our conversion rate from, 3.5% to 6% to make it work, walk away from that, because that does not provide you with any stability. Okay,
Yeah,
you're
that's
buying a
right.
business status quo. You want to make sure that all things being equal, when you take over the business, it's going to remain in the short-term future as it was in the past when you bought it.
Yep, that's right.
Lucas,
100% agree.
great. Thanks, Andres.
Sure.
Okay, Lucas,
Hey, Richard, can you hear me fine?
I hear you perfectly.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. I'm here in the car today because I had to pick up my partner in crime here in the car, my daughter. So
The
just a
big
quick
boss.
question. Yeah, that's the big boss, right? That's what makes life fun and everything. But my question is on the chapter, the Ten Commandments and everything. I want to, there was a distinction that I was not sure how to answer. That is on the like, who is bigger than the game and who owns the gold. So I understand the concept and everything, but are they like two separate persons, or we say like the bigger than the business and own the gold is the same person in that case, or not necessarily?
Two different things, and a great question. So when we talk about, no one's bigger than the game, it's always to understand that when you go into a business, you own a business, you always got a boss. You're always going to have a boss. That may be if you go into a business where certain technology in the business is all resides with one person, or if you're reliant on a single product that you have one supplier related to that, they're the boss. If it's a particular customer or the customers, that's the boss, right? There's always one of those, and understand that it's not like, and the reason why we have this as one of the Ten Commandments is in as much for our clients to to toss on an ounce of skepticism when they look at some of these businesses, because when you get involved with the seller, they're going to paint a magnificent picture for you, almost in all cases, of how wonderful, not only how wonderful the business is, but how wonderful the world is with you being the new owner of this business. It's a magnificent portrait, right? And they have this clean canvas, so they can paint it any way they want. So I want to instill in people to understand that you take that with an ounce of skepticism. When I hear the seller told me this, the seller told me that, and the seller told me the following, I say, well, that's great, but it actually doesn't mean anything unless you validate that information. And so when you look at this and understand that, no one's bigger than the game, there's always a boss. And I think the example that I used in the course was when, Microsoft, was subject to European fines from Europe, right? Because they were just doing business a certain way that they didn't agree. When you see this all the time. So understand, no one's bigger than the game. There is always a boss. You want to control your own destiny, but is it the customer? If there's any element of customer concentration, that could be the boss. What holds the gold is entirely different. The gold is what makes that business by itself valuable. It could be recurring revenue. It could be reoccurring revenue. Does everybody know the difference between recurring revenue and reoccurring revenue? Because you hear people use those two phrases interchangeably, and they're not the same thing. Is there anybody who's
Can you talk about that? I'm interested in that.
Yes. Recurring revenue is revenue that you can count on, that happens consistently, whatever that interval may be. So customers order every month or 2 months. The same customers order every month or every 2 months, or it's a subscription-based program. But you can bet on that particular action happening on a consistent basis that can be measured. That's recurring revenue. You hear about these SaaS businesses, or someone pays for a subscription. Okay. Reoccurring revenue, is the tendency to do business periodically with the same group or individual customers. So for example, someone who's in the construction business, a contractor business, you may have a new home builder who puts up houses on spec, and they do them every couple of years, and they come to you to do the drywall for that. Well, that's a reoccurring customer. Okay, because every couple of years, this individual puts up a new house and they hire you for the drywall. That's very different than if you own an alarm company or a pest control company, and the customers are sending you in checks every month. So it's recurring is recurs at the same interval all the time and consistently from the same group or individuals. Reoccurring is you just have a tendency to do business with that individual. For example, if you go shop at Walmart, you're a reoccurring customer. But you don't go to, if you go there every week and you'll never depart from buying your groceries anywhere else, in their eyes, you theoretically could be a recurring customer. But there's a very distinct difference. And why this is very important to know is when you look at some of these decks or sims that brokers send out, they often recur to recurring revenue. And it's not, it's reoccurring revenue. 70% of the customers buy regularly, but there's no obligation to do that, and they could easily go somewhere else, and it's sporadic. So understand the difference. So in a business, and sorry to digress, gold, for example, could be the recurring component. It could be the fact that you have a proprietary product or a process or a system. So it's what is the single most attractive piece about that business is how you would label the gold. Okay. Thumbs up, Lucas. We're good? Perfect. Okay. Will, I think Will. I see Will's hand up, and I think he's overseas. So maybe there's something related.
Hello there. Sorry about that. So,
there
hey,
you go.
Richard, can you hear me?
Perfectly.
Hey, thanks so much. I'm actually out and about. I'm so excited to be here. Honestly, I've been
Great.
consuming all of your free content, and I'm really, really stoked to speak with you. Yeah. So I was talking to a business owner in the landscaping sector, which is actually a sector that I work in. I have a business in already. He's just doing, something that would maybe take a little bit more time for me to achieve. So it made sense as the first person to speak to. And I've kind of it's an okay business. I'd say it's a good business. It's not a garbage business. But it's one of those things where as the revenue grows, the profit margin shrinks because the staffing cost is just so overwhelmingly big. And I think to myself, for the net profit that it's making, I could be doing a lot less and be still earning the same money, and it's so my assessment of it is I guess my question to you is when we're looking at something like that, where the net profit really is the same as a profitable job, what other signs of our input making it more profitable can we look for to see if it's a deal or not?
It's a great question. The first thing I will tell you that when you look at a business, if there's not a direct relationship to increased revenue and profits, not necessarily percentage-wise, you have to realize that what you ultimately get into is just sometimes just a bigger headache. This is especially so when we're talking about labor. So this landscaping business is a perfect example. Business is doing, we'll just pick an arbitrary number, $1 million a year and making $100,000. Well, in order to get $2 million, you've got to double up in your staff typically because you're selling labor, and sometimes it's not worth the headaches. That's a personal decision, right? There's no commensurate increase in profit margin or profit percentage as revenue increases. You constantly have to add people. That's a decision you have to make because I'm just talking personally. I want to be in a business where as I grow the revenue, I want my margins to potentially increase or certainly not have to incur a whole lot more heartburn to run that business. Especially what you find is if those businesses decline, it very often is problematic. You're stuck with these people. And so sometimes you look at it and say that the increase of revenue sometimes is not worth the aggravation of what it takes to get there. And I'm not saying to take your eyes off the ball of increasing revenue, but sometimes just a lot of heartburn with it. Right. And you see this very often where, business is doing $1 million, making 100 grand. They go to 2 million and they're making 130 and say like, I think I'd rather have $1 million worth of heartburn than 2 million because there's more heartache and heartburn that comes with it. That's a personal assessment. Sometimes it's growth at any cost. single most important thing is a business should never be, you never want to be looking at a business where the margins are decreasing. That's potentially really problematic, because then you keep having to grow to maintain the same profit. And so where profit margins are decreasing, that's something like really could be a red flag. And sometimes there's reasons for it. Like, to give you an idea, Will, like, during COVID, you saw a lot of these businesses just involved with one recently where goods were that they were bringing into, there was a shortage, and goods that they were paying higher prices for material costs. That's subsided quite a bit. Other business, I've seen that the prices have never come down. And so they look and say, well, this is a blip, we'll go through it. But if it becomes a constant and you keep having, to fight margin, and it's tough to increase the top line, that business eventually going to decline. It's inevitable. And it's also becomes very unattractive for someone to buy it. Because you want a business that's going up, at least the margins are at least stable. And the idea is to be able to add on more sales and to increase the business. So it is part of a personal decision. In those businesses, landscaping businesses are, if you take care of the customers, it's hard to lose. It's hard to lose an old customer. It's hard to gain a new customer. That's typical of those businesses. Hard to grow unless you acquire other ones.
Yeah, it's interesting because, I mean, in my current business, I have a mix of, one-time landscaping, design and build projects. Then I have some actual recurring revenue from grounds maintenance, which is actually a really nice model.
Yes.
And actually, I've sort of looked at his business and I thought, well, he's got a bit of that, but how long would it really take me on my own organically just to grow a business of the same margin? It might be slightly smaller in revenue. I think it's tricky because it's like the 0 to $1 million journey. Like, obviously you're kind of increasing your actual income, but then the journey from 1 to 5 is just it's quite a slog, of actually getting that margin to consistently grow in relation to the revenue, because your overheads just suddenly, and your staffing costs suddenly go up so much. So, but yeah, with this particular business, I wanted to be a bit cautious. He's got 2 other people who have supposedly made offers on it. One person who's in the finance sector, and another person who's in the landscaping industry. And he's sort of, I thought, oh wow, so he's sort of quiet. He's like gone a bit quiet since he supposedly had these offers. Which, God bless him. I hope they go well.
Right.
Genuinely, but my suspicion is that one or both of them might fall through.
Yep.
And he might be in a more kind of flexible, and but he might be easier to persuade to do to do a nice deal. What would you say in terms of, like, when there are other people kind of, I know this probably in the content, I'm sorry if I'm wasting your time by asking questions.
You don't waste any time. They're all good questions.
Sorry.
No, it's all good.
Thanks. But yeah, if other people are making an offer, you shouldn't be hasty, But at the same time, you kind of might want to get something moving, and at least, we call it heads of terms, right? It's called heads of terms and
yes.
LOI
Yep.
here. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I didn't actually know that until you said. So yeah, so should you? I don't know. Should you compete, or should you just wait to see what happens with the other offers? Or in this instance, I just want to do your course first, basically.
Okay.
I think I want to be as knowledged up as I can possibly be.
Okay, so it's
a part of me was tempted to just put something together.
So it's a great question. A lot of the time, the situation dictates. Guiding principles are 2 opposite ends of the scale. If the business is giving out $1,000 bills for $800, you move fast. Obviously, in situations where if you believe the broker, and sometimes there are telltale signs, very often a broker version of saying there's other offers, especially a broker. That's like the car salesman version in the United States telling you, I'm going to go speak to the manager, and then they come back and give you a better price. It's just like, that's like broker speak 101. Personally, I never let that influence the decision to make an offer or an LOI, except in cases where I've had enough education, know the market well enough, understand that business well enough to know that, hey, this is a business I want to tie up. And that's rare and very often gets people into a bad position. I don't let other offers or asking price influence decision. That's personal, and I advise people to do that the same way, because most of the people on the call don't have the benefit, for example, of looking at as many businesses I have, so I can get sometimes a read on people a little better. Only not because I'm smarter than anyone. It's just I've been doing this a very long time, and sometimes you get a read or some signals. But I never like. Yeah, I never want to make an offer like with a gun to my head. And the quickest way to determine, by the way, if the broker, the seller's full of crap related to other offers, is just tell them, hey, look, I don't want to screw it up for you. If those offers both fall through, call me back. I'm ready to make an offer today, but I don't want to compete with anybody else at this point. And sometimes you hear them like, don't worry, they're not that serious, and you can move it or whatever. So there's some ways to qualify it. You don't want to be pushed. Now, if there's a situation, for example, Will, you've looked at 10 landscape businesses, some of the metrics, the relationships between number of people, and the revenue, what constitutes good margin. These are good opportunities. And you find one of these listings where hey, this is darn good. This has got all the pieces in it based on my expertise that I've been able to acquire in a certain sector, and you have to move quick. Well, fire in an LOI. Or heads of terms or quick offer. So it's a bit of a balancing act, but the fundamental thing is don't get swayed by what the other side tells you.
Yeah, absolutely. I gathered that from your previous conversations with people. Okay, thanks so much. It's really great to see you, and
my
really
pleasure. You walking through central London, journey. Or where are you now?
Yeah. I'm in Belsize Park.
Beautiful.
So Hampstead.
Wonderful. So we've
Lots
got
of nice
Canada, we've
here.
got the Australia, we got UK, and then we got Todd and Mary from Wisconsin, right? Is that where you are? Okay, so we got it all covered. Okay, perfect. Who's got a question? Alex, go ahead.
Hi, thanks, Richard. I'm not actually a million miles away from Will, so I'm afraid you've got two Brits in a row, which is a dangerous combination. Okay. Terrible, I know. Just very, very briefly on Will's thing, because the brokers in the UK far better than I do. But the biggest one, Will, and I won't name them because I don't want to be sued, but I used to work in the financial services market, and they became public. So I read their prospectus. They sell 6% of their businesses.
Yep.
Literally.
Yep.
It's a big name. And if Will and I ever hook up, I'll tell him I'll fly him privately. But I would have said it's more likely that their offers might be from Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck than anyone credible, because they are terrible liars.
Yes.
But maybe wrong, but that's just a perspective. I know that from from a previous life. I just wanted, if I may, Richard, just to ask something from a positioning perspective, because it's slightly sort of British centric, but we're going through some fairly significant changes on our tax laws here. Our government changed, and unlike the rest of the world, we've veered to the left and everybody else seems to be veering to the right. So there's a new tax law that changes in about 6 weeks, where the amount of relief you got for selling your business goes up 40%.
40, correct?
40. So if you sold a business, you had £1 million sterling of tax relief at 10%.
Yep.
It's going to 14% in just over 5 weeks, and then it's going to 18%. But the other big kicker is that previously as well, if you passed your family business on from one generation to the next, there was no inheritance tax. And from 27, they're going to put quite a big inheritance tax bill on that of 20%. So suddenly, there's an awful lot of businesses where they probably can't afford not to sell, and they definitely can't afford to die. I just want to try and sort of get a question of positioning, because I never like to come across as as doom and gloom. But obviously, it's trying to say to them, and I tend to prefer to write letters to them, just to say, very subtly, are you aware that this is coming down the track and it will really cause you a a lot of pain. So, maybe it's something we should be talking about. And also, just very briefly, Richard, hand in hand with that, I used to have a financial services background. I did specialist risk transfer business, but I didn't want to sort of end my days and be dropped in my box always doing that. So I quite like the idea of doing industrial or engineering, partly because that's what I started off doing, advising clients on large manufacturing, engineering, etc. And I just thought I don't always want to do the finance. I fancy doing something different. So I was just looking at the positioning of saying, I've got some industry knowledge. I ran a business for 20 years. I did most things. I'd like to do something different. And then also positioning to say, don't please just stick your head in the sand, because there is a nasty tsunami of shocks coming down the track, but just getting that messaging right.
Yeah, no, it's a very valid point. I will tell you that in America, the business brokers, by the way, so in this side of the pond, the larger the business, the higher the percentage that sell. It's the lower you go, the more that don't sell. In the world of business brokerage, the average is 25%. 25. So in the UK it's 6, but it's 25% in North America sell. Some of them will tell you it's 33 or whatever, but the average is 25%. And so it gives you an indication of how much garbage is available in the publicly listed. When I say publicly listed, not on the stock exchange, publicly listed business for sale exchanges.
Sure.
As far as the taxes is concerned, it's a very valuable point from the standpoint of a buyer and being able to accelerate a deal. In my experience, sellers and business owners are pretty lax as far as getting on top of this thing and understanding the importance, because very few of them have done any type of significant tax planning. Depending on the timing for this, and I think you said that sort of this estate tax, if you will, which they're trying to do away with here in America. You guys are introducing it, but you're way to the left. So they're trying to introduce it in the UK, is going to have a massive impact on business owners. Because keep this in mind and in perspective, a lot of these businesses don't sell. And so if they don't get handed if there is any question related to future generations, the potential exists for their heirs or their successors to get absolutely hammered. And so that, I think in that instance, you have a leg up or a real opportunity to be able to talk with some of these people to say, hey, if that was going to happen, it may not even make financial sense for you to give it to them. I mean, you may be giving them a bigger burden than they've got by owning the business with this potential tax consequence, especially if they have to work for the business. There's not a big percentage, by the way, especially here, of a family that takes over businesses. It's pretty small.
Same.
It's pretty small.
Richard,
So what I would do if I'm sitting in your shoes, depending on the timing of when you said there's 6 weeks or something, it's going to go from 10 to 14 and from 14 to 18. When is this 18 coming into place?
The 10 to 14 comes in on the 6th of April, and that's not quite so bad. The double whammy is the 18% and the tax liability comes in the following year.
I would make that a point.
Yeah.
I would make that a point.
My thinking was to say, look, I'm a Gen Z. I've been around a bit. I've run some businesses, but if you really are not careful, you will just completely obliterate your estate, because your heirs are going to get a tax bill and they probably won't even realize what it is. And suddenly,
it is.
Our equivalent of the IRS, which is called HMRC, they're banging on the door, and in 6 months they want their money. And they'll start to take it if they don't get it.
What I would do is, there are probably some savvy people like yourself that are trying to take advantage of that and in that type of pitch. I would get all over it in a hurry, personally, because I think you'll find out pretty quickly if it's resonating. Because if it does prove to be a valuable tool for people to generate some deal flow, before you know it, everybody's going to be doing it. And so I would jump all over this thing as far as the presentation is concerned, and see if this turns out to be a good marketing strategy from creating some deal flow. I wouldn't wait.
That's great.
I mean, even if there's businesses that may not be of interest, I'd get 100, 200, or 500 letters out and see and measure what the what the response is, because some of these people probably don't even know about it.
I think that's the thing. I just really I didn't want to come across as being negative and opportunistic, but on the other hand, I can say, look, I'm 10 years probably away from where you are in terms of wanting to go, but you now can't do, before you might have been able to do nothing. The worst thing that happens, the business shuts down, it moves on, and that's it. Now it's going to be much worse because they'll be knocking on your door. And what we don't know yet, and of course, as with all tax authorities, the devil is in the detail.
Yeah.
They haven't said how they're going to value that percentage. Is it the day after the owner dies when a clever accountant comes in and said, well, actually, it's worth this amount of money. It's declined for 6 months because the children don't know what to do with it. And they still get a big tax bill saying, sorry, but it's the day after your father or mother died. That's the way it goes.
Yeah, they're going to value it at would give them the greatest amount of money possible for Her Majesty. Now, the other part about this is I don't think you're being negative and opportunistic. I think you're being positive and opportunistic, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I think presented in the right light of saying, are you aware? And these are something, if you have any thoughts about selling your business over the next period of time, the time to start thinking about your business, the time to start thinking about selling your business is not when you want to start selling your business. It's the time is a year, 2 years, or 3 years in advance of selling a business. I do a lot of intermediary work, and I will say categorically 80% of the sellers that I meet with, they're nowhere near ready to sell their business. And you're 2, 3 years down the road. So I think you give yourself, I think there's a good opportunity here, and you might as well explore it. It may turn into nothing, but I would personally, I would be all over this. I think it's a great possibility from a marketing and deal flow perspective. And you may also find that certain sectors that may increase substantially over the next period of time between now and 2027 or whatever that number is, maybe even be more attractive than other sectors. So yes, I'm all in with that sort of strategy.
No, that's great. Well, I've nearly finished the book, so I'm ready to go. But yeah, no, it's. I think it's just as you say, it's just doing that and saying, well, actually, this is something you really do need to be aware of, and because otherwise, it's going to be horrible. And I'll finish it just in 30 seconds. Our economy is actually going really badly at the moment. We're just about staying out of recession, and so. There's a very strong suggestion that the person that runs our finances is called our Chancellor of the Exchequer. She's called Rachel Reeves. She's going to be raising more taxes again in probably the end of this year. And you'll see even on the American channels that the other one she's done it to are our farmers. She's told the farmers she's going to start taking taxes away from them. So it's also to say to them, look, this might not be the end of it, because they're not going to tax the ordinary working people. They're going to come after people that most people in Main Street think are wealthy, which is business owners.
Of course. So, I mean, it's when we talk about, politics, certainly all day, it's inevitable. When they're spending too much money, you got to find out, you got to figure out a way how to raise it. And, I grew up in Canada. It's much more a socialist country, similar to Australia, similar to the UK. And eventually I love it when Canadians tell me, well, and you get it from my wife's an Aussie, by the way, Ed. And so I get it all the time, like they talk about the medical plan, it's our national treasure and we have free healthcare. Well, it's not free. Someone's paying for it. It's just a matter of where you take the dollar. So eventually, if if you're not bringing in more than you're spitting out, I mean, at some point you got to figure out a way to, and the governments have no way to market it. So market their way to money. They don't know how to stop spending. So they just raise the taxes, but that's a whole other conversation. Okay.
Absolutely.
Great.
No, thanks, Richard. That's
keep me posted how this goes.
I'll keep you posted. That's basically what I'm going to do. I'm going to do an old-fashioned letter writing campaign and just say to them, let's have a chat, because nothing ventured, nothing gained.
Absolutely. And I'm a big fan of a personal letter. Then especially now it sticks out like crazy. Okay, Todd.
Absolutely. Thanks, Richard. Appreciate
Thank you, Alex.
Thank you.
Great point. Keep me posted.
Will do.
Hey, Richard. Good to see you.
Always a pleasure.
Say, you had a conversation with Will that kind of stimulated a question in my mind, because Mary and I have been looking at some of the businesses within the service industry, and it goes to scaling up and down a business. Does it make a big difference in your mind? Like the one we're looking at right now, it's got about 47 W-2 employees. And, I kind of was starting to think about, in this particular industry, it probably doesn't matter so much, but in some other industries that might, does it matter if they're W-2 or if they're 1099? Is it better to have 1099 to scale down if you had to?
Well, I mean, the answer is yes. It's easier to scale down if they're 1099. And Ed, Alex, Will, 1099 versus W-2. A W-2 is an employee that you get, the company deducts at source. They pay $1,000. The company deducts taxes that are owing, medical benefits, whatever they're owing at source, and gives them a net check or paycheck every pay period. And also the company has a certain contribution. They are, in essence, a full-time employee or an employee of the company, and the company is responsible for withholding taxes and remittance. 1099s are where someone is hired potentially as a consultant or periodic work, and they give them a gross check, that same amount, but there's no taxes withheld, there's no employer contribution. Yes, so I'm going to give you the answer to your question and then going to tell you why it won't work, Todd. The answer to your question is yes, it's much easier to let go of 1099 employees because you don't have to let them go. You're just not renewing your service contract with them. The flip side it is the IRS cracked down on 1099 employees a number of years ago because every company wanted to do the same thing to save their withholdings, reduce their exposure. There are very specific criteria that constitutes whether or not someone meets the litmus test for a 1099. As an example, you cannot have a 1099 employee who's responsible for delivering a certain outcome. By that, I mean, if your 1099 relationship is with someone, you say, you've got to produce X number of sales calls during the course of the week, they don't meet the test. If they have to report to a certain to an office or have certain reporting responsibilities or certain preset hours or certain preset responsibilities, they do not meet the litmus test of a 1099. It is very rigid today because everybody was trying to do this for a number of years. So there's been a massive crackdown on the last few years. And the other thing, by the way, it is a close to impossible undertaking to convert people from W-2 to 1099. You do it the other way, but if you have W-2 employees, it is darn near impossible to convert them to 1099 because they're not going to meet the test. And it's an immediate red flag by the IRS. Now, if you're looking, by the way, at a business and they talk to you about having these, so that's the first part of your question. If you're looking at a business and they have these 1099, oh, see the message from Ed. Thank you, Ed. Great to see you. He said he's got to fly. If you are looking at a business and they say that most of the employees or a certain number of employees are in a 1099 relationship, you have to be very careful early on during your due diligence to make sure that they meet the test of 1099. And so I would urge you to know what that criteria is because those are the questions you want to ask the seller. You have businesses, they don't even know that they don't meet the test. That's number one. Number two, if they're not legitimate 1099 payees and they've got to convert to W-2, you as the new owner are going to incur new costs. Because again, 14, 15% of withholdings right off the bat. Okay. There's also potential for obligation related to vacation time or benefits or what have you. So you have to go through that exercise. It happens frequently with our clients, and we adjust the earnings downward for what that's going to look like. So it's very doable, but do yourself a favor and educate yourself about what constitutes or does not constitute a 1099 because you have to defend it.
Do you also put more value in a W-2 when you're looking to acquire a business because they're more likely to stay or that they're more involved with the company? No. Okay.
They're all likely to stay when they're getting paid, and they're all likely to leave if you don't treat them respectfully.
Well, I was just thinking because, W-2s, they get benefits, so they're maybe more likely to stay.
There could be something to that, yes. Every employee is worried about their job after a company is sold, and the tendency is nowhere near as prevalent for people to leave. Once the water settles, they're pretty good. You don't have a huge turnover. And when I say as long as you treat them respectfully, that's actually the most important part of the equation. When people get over the fear of a company, I think I've told a bunch of people on this call several times, employees' jobs are absolutely safer with a new owner than an old owner, because the new owner doesn't know their nonsense and baggage and all of that stuff. And so but the employee doesn't realize that. So it's a natural tendency to be fearful. So the quicker that you get in and assure everybody, I'm always take the tact of, we're not, as long as it's true, of course, we're not replacing any positions. Now, that's a very big difference than saying we're not replacing any people. Because you don't want to, Alex, in America, everybody sues each other, right? You know that, right? So when you say we're not replacing any employees, if you replace one employee, you got a lawsuit on your hands. So here, everybody sues each other.
We're about to change our law again. Left-wing government, they're giving an enormous rights bill, which has very similar situations. Like, for example, you can go in and say on day one, I want to work from home flexibly. And if they can't give a valid reason, they can sue the company.
Yeah, God bless them.
We're trust me, we're getting there. Don't worry.
Yeah, I know you're getting there, but you're going to the wrong side. We've had that. Exactly. We're coming back here.
And you're going the other way. We're coming.
We're going one way, and I say that as a Canadian. I've seen both instances. And if you want to be an entrepreneur or any element of capitalism, better off to go the other way, because it just becomes over. The employers who take all the risk and absorb everything, and end up getting penalized. To Todd and Mary, it behooves you and everybody on this call who's in the United States, understand the difference between a 1099 and a W-2. There are very few relationships that pass the 1099 test. Very few.
Okay, thanks. Appreciate that. Yeah, we got a little research to do then.
Yeah.
Have a look as well, just as a sub-interest. We have something called IR35, which is exactly the same categorization, but the tax authorities have started to get really draconian. You can bet your bottom dollar the IRS are having a look at thinking, those guys in Britain, they're getting a lot of money out of this. Yeah. We'll have some of the same.
Oh, it's been a massive crackdown here over the last few years, because it was very loosey-goosey for a long time, and it's for the last little while. It just doesn't happen anymore. So you've just got
they all talk to each other, and they all know what each other's tactics are.
Yeah, they all correct. And as soon as one has a good idea, or thinks it's a good idea. Do we see Will? Do you have your hand raised? No. All right. Anybody else here? I like Jojo Tang's logo that they have for their name here. It looks like a panther or a Florida panther. So it looks great. I don't know if everybody could see that, but it looks. Hi, Jojo. How are you?
Hi. Thank you for taking the time. I'm really new to Search, so I'm just listening through everyone's stories and questions.
Great. So we're happy to have you. We always like to see a picture, I understand, but it was a good logo regardless, and welcome. We're happy to have you. Just by way of information, try to do these about once a month. I've had a number of requests to come up to do these more frequently, and maybe we will with some of our clients who follow with the program. That's one thing I wanted to ask people afterwards. But don't even though you're new at this, I had someone send me an email today and said, I don't know if he's on the call. I'm going to see. It was actually yesterday, and he said, I have a dumb question. And my answer to him was, there's no such thing as the dumb questions. There's only dumb answers. And so, a lot of this, if you don't take this in stages, this is all very manageable. This process of going through for some people takes longer, some less, but it's a very manageable process when you do it in bite-sized pieces. But you're going to have a lot of questions. And, the best piece of advice I can give you is make sure you're getting the answers from the right people who've have already been where you're trying to get to, because there's just a lot of noise. Yeah, good, perfect. There's a lot of noise in this space, so differentiate yourself. And again, we're very happy to have you.
Thank you so much.
Good. Any other questions here so far?
So Richard, maybe one question.
Of course.
Again, going back to the 10 principles, can you expand more on the recipe for the business?
Yes.
What is the recipe? You mentioned, of course, is a process or something that can be repeated over and over, right? Or something like this. But can you expand a little bit more? What's the recipe of the business, which is on the 10 Commandments section?
So the point that I make here, and I don't know why I'm getting an echo back for some reason. Do you hear that? No, okay, that's because I guess Lucas for some reason. Okay, perfect. So the 10 commandment related to this is ingredients are nothing without a recipe. And so the story that I tell is when I was unfortunately made single, not on purpose, I had to start cooking for myself. And so I had my mother, who was now 94 years old, and God bless her. She always was a great cook. I had her send me some, recipes because I couldn't keep eating out every night. And so I got pretty amazed pretty quickly that, if you follow this recipe, it's like, my God, my meatballs can taste exactly like my mother's meatballs. And, that this whole concept related to recipes is that if you just follow certain prescribed in food, certain ingredients and certain measurements, well, the odds are it's going to turn out the same way because it's the exact same formula. So when you look at a business, very often a business will have certain components to it. When you look as a buyer, say, hey, they seem to have a great product. Their staff seems nice. They seem to be well positioned. There's good margins. There's all these little individual fundamental components to the business that seem right. But the whole idea is you got to bring it all together. And understanding what it is, because very often you'll see underperforming businesses. Like there is lots of good businesses run by the wrong people, and they don't have the recipe. And so, and it very often you see that start within the people, within their employees, that they haven't empowered their employees or give them, some latitude to perform and do their work. And if you do it well, you're going to move up. And if you don't do it well, you're going to move out. And so, you have these components of, of people, of processes, of systems, of product, of profit, of financials, all these components to the business. You have to make sure that you can get that recipe in place to make this all work together. Because sometimes when you look at it and say, hey, they have all these great pieces to it, but it's not turning into a great business. Why is that? Or why isn't it a solid business? And very often there is a reason, and it could be, an owner who micromanages, or there could be what seems to be like a good product, but it's not very well received by the marketplace, and you can't really grow this business. So the ingredients are important, but being able to take a step back and say, how am I going to mesh this all together to have a proper recipe to be able to make it work? That's critical. I mean, that's really everything. And so, when we look at these 10 commandments, I look at this whole process in various stages, meaning when I look at a business and want all of you to look at it the same way, there's really three main components. And I think Alexander was on the call earlier, he was talking about social media. It's one of the things I'm been really trying to get my thoughts together about how to position this, but understand it's a logical series of thought to go down to what constitutes the right business. Because the right business isn't a good business. The right business is the right business for you. It may be a good business run by the wrong person. It's not the right business for you, or you're not the right person to run it. So in a series, we have these commandments, but before that, I like to talk first, generally, I like this BOSS theory, BOSS, which is bland or basic. I like a business that's bland or basic. I like a business that's operationally sound. I like a business that's sustainable and scalable. That's sort of like the underpinnings but it's very generic. I mean, it's great that I've told you this, but what the hell are you supposed to do with that, right? I mean, it's generic, but it provides a platform. And then from that, you talk about your 5 golden rules, which we talk about in the course, and that's critical. And if for anybody who doesn't follow our program, if you go onto richardparker.com, I think it's in free educational videos, the one where we talk about the right business, we talk about the 5 golden rules. But you really want to formulate your 5 golden rules, because Lucas, your 5 golden rules are not my 5 golden rules, and my 5 golden rules are not JoJo's or Todd's. I mean, they're very, very, very specific to the individual, and it takes time for those to evolve. I'm doing this for 34 years. I could tell you, if you woke me up in the middle of the night out of my sleep, I can tell you the 5 that mine are, but like a business that's got sales marketing driven, it's got high margins, got an element of exclusivity, it doesn't compete on price, and has got demand in place. But that's from 30 years of doing this. You got to evolve to that. So you have this boss theory, and then you got to negotiate and evolve your 5 golden rules. And then the 10 commandments is what you put every business through that test. And if it passes that, you're going to be good. I mean, that's really the case, because that's got the fundamentals of what a business needs to have in place for it to marry well to those 2 previous theories.
Yeah, I'm working on the 5 right now with
And they'll
Paula. So
evolve.
yeah, by all means. Yeah.
Understand. I mean, when you look at it at the beginning, just need you to turn off your mic for a second because I get a background. So when you're looking at this and you're just getting into this hunt, what you think your 5 golden rules are may not be what your 5 golden rules are in 3 months from now. But then you want to evolve to that quickly. Then you got to stick to it because what I find is people tend to be very generic at the beginning, unfortunately related to their 5 golden rules and say, I want a business that I'm going to feel good about. Well, that's great. What the hell does that mean? Like, no, I want a business that, for example, I want to work with kids. I'll feel good about a business that where I'm working with children or I'm working with pets or working with the elderly or I'm developing a product or I'm building it through the marketing. That's clear and specific. Not saying I want to feel good about business because that sounds great, but you can't quantify. It means nothing. So understand you always want to keep revisiting those 5 golden rules that you look at different businesses to make sure you know what's important in a business for you.
Perfect. Thank you.
We got 13 more minutes, and I apologize. Normally, I'm happy to sit on the phone all night. I do have a hard stop today after our 90 minutes, but I do have a couple of questions, and I think if we don't get through them today, probably set up another call over the next couple of weeks because there's a bunch of questions that I've seen come up recently and want to help you guys work through. For example, this was one of our clients actually, Jan, the last couple of days when he was looking at the numbers, sent me the numbers and made a correction to them, which actually flipped the whole narrative related to the business. And that was because of the way the resource or the spreadsheet that he was working on. And it was a very logical mistake that anyone could make, right? It wasn't like anything crazy, but it flipped the whole narrative from big business making like a good whack of money to like barely. And so one of the things that I would encourage you guys is when you start doing these spreadsheets and you plug in seller numbers and you do your adjustments, always get a second set of eyes on it, especially before you make an offer, whether it be an accountant, whether it be me, whatever, get a second set of eyes. Todd has Mary, Mary has Todd, so that works well. But get a second set of eyes on it because sometimes you just, you look, especially with numbers, like you look at them so much already, they all start to look the same after a while. So that's very important. The other thing was a point related to the asking price. We don't pay attention to the asking price. Never. We might want to understand it so we know how the seller was thinking about it. Asking price is not your valuation. You come to your own valuation on a business. If that doesn't work for the seller, that's fine. If you think if they get insulted by it, that's okay too, because for them to be asking something up here that's only worth something down here is actually insulting to the buyer. So don't let yourself be influenced in any way, shape, or form by the asking price if it's within realms of possibility for an acquisition you could make. So in other words, if you're looking for business and through your resources that you're going to buy a $5 million business, well, you're not going to look at $50 million business. I'm saying when you're getting in the hunt and the seller presents you with what their asking price is, we don't care. I mean, it bears no influence on our decision making at all. Okay, so that's really important. Couple other points that I want to cover off is related to SBA financing. Who's here in the United States? So we have the SBA, which only funds it's maximum about 10% of the deals. The last tabulation was about 6%, but that's about 10. A couple of things. When a broker tells you it's SBA pre-qualified, I'm going to bring something up on a screen share. I apologize here, everybody. Not negligence. I should have had this up earlier to show you guys. It'll take me 1 second to bring up. Okay, here we go. I'm going to do a screen share. When a broker says to you the business is SBA pre-qualified, that lender will have a pre-qualification letter that they will send the broker or the business owner. So when they tell you it's pre-qualified, you want to get a copy of that terms letter. If they tell you there isn't a terms letter, they're full of crap. That business is not pre-qualified. When you submit something to an SBA lender for pre-qualification, they give you a terms letter. It looks something like this. How do I share my screen here? Let me just see here. Okay. Hopefully everybody can see this. Thumbs up if everybody can see this. Good. So this is actually from Gulf Coast Small Business Lending. This is business acquisition financing scenario. They put the name and the business location here, and then they will give you the purchase. You submit documentation to them. They come back to you with a proposal. Could everybody see both sides here? And so this will give you the working capital, what the SBA guarantee, estimated closing costs, everything related to that business, okay? Who the agent is, etc. This is actually a business I was working on representing, but this is what it looks like. So when they send to you it's SBA pre-qualified, there will be one of these. Okay. Now it could be a different version. Like in this case, I think the buyer was potentially putting down 10% and then there was a seller note, or it'll look like one of these where they talk about a 90% stock purchase, and they're just different numbers, but they give you a deal breakdown. Okay. And if anybody wants more information on that, just send me an email. The point being, when a broker says to you it's SBA pre-qualified, there's one of these. If they don't give you one of these, it's not one of those. Got it? Okay. The other point is when they tell you it should qualify for SBA. Well, if it should qualify for SBA, it's incumbent upon the broker or the seller to get that SBA pre-qualification. Because think about it. You look at 10 different businesses and they tell you it's SBA pre-qualified. You're not going to start sending this to, all the documentation needed to multiple lenders to wait for approval back. So if they tell you it's SBA pre-qualified, you ask them for a copy of the terms letter. If they tell you it should be, you tell them to please submit it to the SBA lender for pre-qualification. What an SBA lender requires are the following: 3 years of tax returns and the most recent quarterly statement with a comparison to the prior year. So now I'm going to tell you a war story of a business that I'm working on. I'm working with these owners. Two very specific parts, and it'll be a good lesson for everybody. Two specific parts of the business. They sell to auto aftermarket. Good business, $7+ million in revenue, profitable. They have two very specific components, products to the business. One is a proprietary product, one is a distributed product. Originally, they wanted to sell the proprietary product. Never going to happen through the SBA because they can't divide up their tax returns. They have a consolidated tax return with both products, all the revenue for both products. SBA, look at it, it's impossible for them to divide up and determine. They could determine the revenue, but they can't determine the associated costs. And so, in that particular case, just to let you know, if, when you guys eventually buy a business, if there's ever two distinct parts to a business, run your business with two distinct parts. If a seller tells you, oh yeah, you could, buy this part or it's going to go SBA, understand that there's certain criteria related to SBA. I know this backwards and forwards. So as you go through this, if you're told something related to the SBA doesn't sound right, or you're not sure, just email me. Because it's very important. You don't want to spend all this time going through an LOI, a due diligence, or all this exercise and find out that it doesn't qualify for the SBA, because that should be done. It's incumbent on the broker, not the buyer. What I will tell all of you, though, in America is get yourself SBA pre-qualified. You may not use SBA. That's a decision you'll decide whether or not to make. But if you're looking at a business and they say how you're going to get financing, at least you could say, I'm qualified for this. So do that quickly. There's no obligation, but at least you'll know where you stand. You'll probably go the route of seller financing anyways in most cases, but it's worth you doing. So hopefully everybody's clear. And I had a bunch of other things that came up over the last little while. Esther, nice to see you. Wave hello.
Hi, thank you. I had a quick question about that, and sorry, I'm brand new.
Go. Great.
Yeah, so how much of SBA qualification is contingent on personal credit?
It's depends on where you fall and where your lender. They vary. Some of them are 740, some of them are 600. It's more related to assets, so it's a combination. Past defaults are problematic, but if your credit is reasonably good, there is some pretty good parameters that can pass. Personal credit is important. The most important thing, like it is with other stuff, if there's not bankruptcies or that type of stuff, it's important. If you have a good SBA lender, they will help you bolster your application. Now, they're not never going to do anything illegal, obviously, but certain things that, for example, if you have a 600 credit rating, and that is not going to qualify for a certain lender, but they look at it and say, but you also have an investment property. They're able to look at those and bolster up your case, if you will.
Thank you.
Okay, of course. It's so nice when everybody puts their camera on, because like at least you could put it's so much nicer to put a face to an email. Like, it's great. So stay on there, Esther, because it's nice to see you. And I see we get these, and sometimes it's crazy, you look at the order log, or I get direct emails. It's just nicer to see people's faces. So I appreciate it. I actually wrote this whole thing on, I don't know if you guys saw that LinkedIn post that I wrote recently about having meaningful relationships with people related to the business transaction. So if you take a look at it, then it's sort of like this is this idea that there's so much competition. There's so much amongst buyers and other people looking, it's a numbers game about you have to look at, you got to average 10 businesses a month that you're meeting with sellers and having meaningful relationships with people. It's so much more important than the numbers. So when you get into these conversations with sellers, Esther, you brought up a point related to the SBA. Let's say, for example, someone can't qualify for SBA for credit or for what other reason. But if you establish a really nice, meaningful relationship with a seller and they see that their legacy could be perpetuated by you being the owner of the business, very often they'll go to the far side of crazy and generosity to help you acquire that business. And that could only happen when you have a good, meaningful relationship with someone. These buyers who jump right in. I get it all the time from these fancy MBAs, and they jump in, they send me all these great pivot tables and these wonderful theses and whatever. And they're all these, to say that here's what they're doing and here's their criteria. And I say to them, how many conversations have you had with sellers? How many times have you sat in front of someone and had a good, meaningful conversation? Because that's especially important, because every deal runs into a problem. And if you have a nice relationship and you've built credibility and built trust with the other side over a period of time, you're going to get it worked out. And I will also tell you, that in the small business transaction, the majority of them are seller financed. They're not SBA. It's the only way to get deals done, because most businesses and most individuals do not qualify. It's gotten a lot of profile and it's got a lot of excitement. Everyone says, oh, I could buy a $5 million business, put 5% down or nothing down. It all sounds wonderful, but a lot of things have to happen for that to get to a close. Any other questions?
Yeah, just going back about the SBA loan. I was talking with some bankers actually. Some of them, they told me that they cannot pre-qualify me unless I already passed the deals or the financial statements of the business that I'm interested in. I just want to mention that actually.
Find another lender.
Oh yeah.
Either one of two things
I
is
used
happening. Either they don't want to
I used
finance your business, or they're full of crap. Every bona fide lender will at least look through, and they may not give you a hard letter to say here's exactly what you qualify for, but they will give it a proper look, and the legit ones will give you a pre-qualification.
Well, I used the SBA.gov searcher on the official website. I just went through the whole list, actually called them, but nope.
I didn't understand. I didn't
Well,
understand
that's
your
the answer
question.
that I got, but I was still looking for it. Huh?
You got very garbled. I didn't hear the part of your question. Sorry.
Oh, no. It wasn't a question, actually. I just say that I searched the SBA loan on the official website, sba.gov,
Yep.
and then I look for all the lenders around my area that are in the SBA program. But when I call all of them, they say that they cannot pre-qualify me. But I think I will just still search in other states or in other cities.
Yeah.
And
The
hopefully I
first
will
thing
get
is, by the
somebody.
way, you want to use an SBA preferred lender, not an SBA lender, an SBA preferred
Exactly,
lender,
yeah.
because a preferred lender can actually approve the deal. There's still paperwork to be done with the SBA, but they can approve the deal. And so an SBA preferred lender. The other thing is, sometimes it's worth it because it doesn't cost, well, it costs you, but it doesn't really cost you anything, is you work with an SBA broker. They farm out the
Okay.
deal to X number of people. Like there's one here, you can mark it down. I think this guy's name is Bruce Marks or Marks. I think it's Mark, Marks. You guys look it up. And if it's not the right one, send me an email. I'll find it for you. But I
He's
think
not
it's,
a broker. He's
what's
just
that?
a banker.
Is he working for someone now directly?
Yeah, he's a banker. First bank of the league.
Bruce Marks?
Yeah, it's Marks, right? Because he was a pretty prolific SBA broker. But if not, I'll find you guys one. The SBA preferred lenders can get you much further down the road. A broker could potentially recommend where you may want to get some pre-qualification, but it can be done without question.
All right.
Good.
Thank you.
Well, folks, I'm going to set up another call over the next few weeks because there's a bunch of questions that have come in that I think people will find helpful. As usual, if there's any of you guys follow the material, our course, How to Buy a Good Business at a Great Price. You have any questions, you know where to get in touch with me. For those that don't, we have a lot of great videos and articles on the website on richardparker.com. So go get yourself smart, and then you'll get yourself a business. Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice to see everyone.